Hey there, welcome. So we live in an interesting time in that we know that there are so many opportunities to become successful, yet the challenges and struggles in order to get there are more intense than they've ever been. So in this video we're going to delve into the whole idea of productivity and success and break things down into the three areas that are needed in order for you to be able to achieve and realize your full potential. So the structure of this video is going to mimic the book Limitless by Jim Kwik, in that we're going to break things down into the three M's, which are mindset, motivation, and methods. So the order of these three M's actually matters because motivation is completely irrelevant if you don't have the mindset that you want to achieve or believe that you can. The same is true for methods, because if you have the right tactics or approaches to be able to succeed, but you don't have the motivation or willingness to do so, then it completely defeats the point. So we're going to go through each of these core areas one by one, and hopefully by the end of the video you'll have a good idea of what it takes to be able to get to where you want to, and the kinds of things that might be getting in your way personally. So starting with mindset, it's very important that you have the right beliefs and the right kind of optimistic outlooks so that these don't hold you back and you actually believe that it's possible to get to where you want to. So I'm going to go through some mental blockers which often holds people back or even prevents them from getting started in the first place. So the first thing that we want to disprove is the idea that your skills, intelligence, or abilities are fixed. You can see why this is a very counterproductive belief, because if you don't see the possibility that you can acquire new skills or develop your intelligence or improve some abilities in some kind of way, then it's going to be very hard to motivate yourself to even attempt to try and do so. Like all of these specific beliefs, the only way to overcome them is to prove to yourself that they're false. And the best way to do this is to go out and scout and seek evidence that proves that they're not true. Now, it may take some time before you can convince yourself that these things aren't true, but it's well worth the effort in the long run. I think if you look around and look behind the scenes to most people, particularly successful ones, it will become very obvious that where they are now and where they started are two very different places. This should help convince you that the kinds of skills and abilities that are necessary to reach that kind of success are not innate and that they are learned. The other important one is the idea that intelligence is fixed, or at the very least it's limiting. But this isn't true, because if you actually look at what intelligence is, and many people consider it to be the rate or speed of learning, then it becomes increasingly obvious that even if you learn more slowly than other people, then it's not necessarily a problem as long as you're directing that learning in the right place. Because someone who learns slowly but learns the right kinds of things is going to be better off than someone who learns quickly but directs that attention to the wrong kinds of things. To reference the cliche, it's not the tools you have, but it's how well you use them. But even then, that's assuming that intelligence is fixed, but that's not actually true, because if you look at some of my previous videos, I kind of go into how you can increase both your intelligence or IQ and your intellect. The other thing that disproves this belief is the idea of neuroplasticity, and this is the idea that your brain is continually forming new types of connections which adapts and changes over time, so that your brain at one stage in your life could be very different than another stage of your life. Typically your brain adapts to your environment or your values. So if you surround yourself with more positive people or find an environment that's more conducive of productivity and success, then your brain will eventually start to mold itself towards that type of environment. The next belief that often holds people back is the idea of failure and how other people will judge them as a result of it. So there are two ways of approaching this idea that will help you overcome it, and that's the idea of looking at failure itself and looking at the judgment aspect. So a good way of coming to terms with failure and seeing it in a different kind of way so that you can realize that it's not actually a bad thing is to realize that it's necessary and it's a prerequisite for any kind of success. Again, if you look around, this becomes more and more obvious. So even when you were a child and you were learning to walk, you wouldn't have been able to learn to walk if you didn't fall over and over again, because these little failures over time allow you to make slight adjustments until you reach the point where walking is second nature to you. I know it's a little bit trite to say, but failure really is an opportunity to learn. Also, when you look back on your life, you're far more likely to regret not trying over the failures themselves. So a good way of overcoming any mindset is to put yourself in the shoes of your future self and look back on your life now. It'll become very obvious that the kinds of things that you need to do, or the kinds of things that you may end up regretting doing or not doing, you can actually avoid if you action them now. In terms of the whole idea of judgment and that your peers will judge you for failing, well, this is another misconception that I think holds people back. Another way to help put things into perspective is to realize that if you have a fear of other people constantly judging you, and when you're walking into a particular situation, your mind is always on the idea that what will other people think of you, then it's very possible that their mind is also on the same thing. So rather than taking the egocentric approach and assuming that everyone is constantly thinking and judging and analysing your own life, it's much more likely that they're doing the exact same thing about their life, in which case people are much more focused on themselves than you, so therefore your failures are less likely or might not even at all be noticed by these people. And even if they do notice, if they're good friends, then they will help support you, point you in the right direction, or encourage you to move forwards. And if your worst fears come true and your friends do berate you or judge you and make you feel bad about your failures, then there's a good chance that they're not actually the friends who you thought they were. So the last belief that we're going to try and disprove is that success is purely a result of natural talent. So I'm not implying that natural talent or natural interest in something doesn't exist, but when you look at the big picture and you look at the people who reach the top, you will see that often they work that much harder than everyone else. So the factor that actually matters is not natural talent itself, but how much desire do you have for reaching your goals. The truth is, it takes a lot of time and effort and energy to be able to make something look effortless. The other thing is, if you do have natural talents, proclivities, or interests, it's not those individual things that will get you to the top, but it's the combination of those things, which is called skill stacking. What this means is that it's not the individual skills that help you stand out, it's when you combine these skills in unique ways, and then this combination of skills can be channeled in a way that helps you maximize your potential and reach where you want to go. So I like to use the example of Cristiano Ronaldo in football, as many people consider him to be one of the best players of all time. So if you look at his individual traits, you'll struggle to find any where he's the best in that trait in the world. So for example, he's not the fastest player in the world, or the strongest, or he doesn't kick the ball the hardest, or he's not the best penalty taker or free kick taker, but when you combine everything together, he's one of the best players in the world, because it's his unique combination of these skills that sets him apart. So now we're going to move on to motivation and cover 3 things that can either boost your motivation or help you avoid the kinds of things that zap your motivation. So if your goal is to become successful or achieve a specific goal, then one of the most important things you can do is to find a strong reason why you're doing it. I often think back to the analogy with Simon Sinek with the golden circle, where you have an outer circle, which is your what, a middle circle, which is your how, and your inner circle, which is your why. Now, typically he uses this in the context of companies and corporations, but I think it also applies to your own personal life and your goals as well. So knowing what you're going to do is one thing, and it's a good start. Knowing how you're going to do it makes it tangible because you've got a concrete plan, but this plan is hard to execute and fulfill if you don't have a strong reason why you want to fulfill or pursue that particular goal. The reason for this is that your why is your core, your foundations. Everything else is built on top of that. And if you don't have that strong reason why, then you're reliant completely on short-term motivation or your particular mood at that particular time. It's your reason why that will keep you going when you feel lethargic, lacking in energy, maybe even demotivated. But if you can always draw back to why you're doing it, it can give you energy and perseverance even in times of difficulty. Another way of looking at this same idea is, what would the consequences in your life be if you fail to reach this particular goal, or worse, fail to even try and pursue it? The other thing to note about your strong reason why, which sort of ventures into the how category, is that what specific things are you willing to sacrifice in order to be able to achieve the thing that you're aiming for? At the end of the day, there's always going to be such a thing as opportunity cost, because if you're pursuing one thing, then you're not pursuing another thing. Therefore, the thing that you're not pursuing could in fact be a regret. So if you pursue your career at the expense of your family or relationships, then this could be something that you're going to later regret, and that might be counterproductive to achieving the thing that you actually wanted. It's not to say that you can't achieve your career aspirations and manage and have a healthy family at the same time, but usually when you pursue something so vigorously, there's something else that has to take a hit. So it's much better to be consciously aware of the kinds of things you need to sacrifice, rather than being naive or ignorant to these things and later on regretting them. So for example, if you have particular career aspirations, then maybe the only way to achieve them is to eat into some of your free time. So that might mean playing less video games or watching less TV, and using the time between your work day finishing and you going to bed to pursue some kind of side hustle, for example. So the next point within motivation is lifestyle and energy. Obviously, the extent to which you take this seriously will depend on the magnitude of your goals, but if you're aiming very high, then you need to start learning to treat your body and your mind like a prized racehorse. If you think about it, this applies to everything really, but using the example of sports, if you don't act like a winner, it's very hard to actually become a winner. This means that you need to prepare yourself in the best possible ways, fuel yourself using the best possible sources, and train yourself using the best types of practices. I have created some videos delving into some of these concepts, but I will definitely create some future videos that either explore these in more detail or cover some of the ones that I haven't yet done. So these are the kinds of things that you should ideally focus on that will give yourself the best chances of success. But like I said previously, the extent to which you need to take these seriously will depend on how ambitious your goals are. The next idea is that of incremental progress. So what I find personally is a big part of success and motivation is momentum. This momentum is useful because it helps keep you going, it keeps your energy levels high, it keeps your motivation high, but more importantly, it gives you something to reflect back on. So when it comes to motivation, it's very important that you're able to witness the fruits of your labor, because then you have some proof that the kinds of things that you're doing is steering yourself in the right direction, but also you have stuff to look back on with fondness. Like I've said in a previous video, when you're aiming for something that you currently don't have or you currently are not, then it's important that you build up a body of proof and evidence that you are the kind of person who you're hoping to be. One of the best ways to help you achieve this is by breaking down your goals into smaller subtasks so that each subtask that you complete is a win, and therefore it will give you added motivation and added momentum towards reaching the next one. So now we're going to move on to methods, which are specific tactics or strategies that you can employ that helps guide and focus your attention and motivation in the best possible ways to facilitate learning, memory, and more. So starting with learning, there's a particular mental framework that I use that helps put into perspective the best ways of learning and retaining information. This is the idea of mental or emotional reference points. So if you think about it, at this very moment, you've got a certain body of knowledge. So there's certain things that you've accumulated and built up over the course of your life to get you to this particular point. So for example, you have a certain vocabulary, which is a set of words that you already know the meaning for. The same is true for symbols, colors, images, and so on, where you can associate that image with something of deeper meaning. So to simplify this analogy a little bit, imagine that you only know 10 words, but you want to learn an 11th. Well, the way you would do it is to try and relate that 11th word back to the 10 words that you already know. So for example, if the 11th word that you're trying to learn is dog, and one of the words that you already know is animal, then you can realize that a dog is a type of animal, and this can help you to put into perspective what that 11th word actually means. Now this is a very simple example, but this is in fact roughly how you would have learned throughout your childhood. You would have started off with very basic words like mum or dad, and over time you would have expanded your vocabulary, and now when you get to the point where you're trying to learn a new word by, say, looking at it in the dictionary, when you read the dictionary reference or meaning for that word, what you're actually reading is words that you already understand. So then when you can combine all those words together, you can form a new meaning for what the new word is. So using an example to me personally, I'm currently trying to learn Italian, and at some point I've come across the word attraverso, which means I cross. Now if I keep repeating this word or studying it, at some point through sheer determination and repetition, this word will likely stick. But a far more effective strategy to learn this word is to try and tie it back to something that I already know. So in this case, I understand that the word probably derives from the same thing that the word in English to traverse does. So in English, if I want to traverse something, I know it basically means to cross it. So the word traverse sounds very much like attraverso, so now it's much easier for me to remember the meaning of this word. The other consequence of this is over time, when you expose yourself to healthy and productive information, often by reading, you build up more and more of these reference points. So if you started off at some point in your life with 100 or 1,000 or 100,000 reference points, as you come across new types of information, and this could be historical, learning about cultures, it could be languages, it could be maths or science, eventually it becomes easier and easier to expand this because everything that you now learn can be tied back to a larger body of knowledge. If you think about it, the hardest way to learn is when you know absolutely nothing about what you're learning. But if you already have some kind of basis or foundation, then building and expanding upon that foundation is a much easier and more effective strategy to employ. So when it comes to memory or retaining information, one of the best strategies is to in some way relate things back to stories. So it turns out that our brains have evolved to become very efficient at storing information in a narrative form as opposed to a tabular form or a list form. This is why when you grew up, you're often taught certain fundamentals through the medium of song, poem, or some kind of story. This sort of ties back to some extent to the whole reference point concept, but if you're trying to remember, say, 8 or 10 random words, then it's going to be much easier to turn these 8 or 10 words into a story containing all of them, rather than try to rely on pure or raw brain power to be able to retain these words in isolation. The reason why this is true is again down to evolutionary reasons, because throughout most of human history there was no concept of words or even symbols up until relatively recently. So random text or facts was far less beneficial from an evolutionary perspective because these things didn't keep us alive. What was much more important is the ability to keep ourselves alive and to reproduce. And the best way to do this is to be aware of the kinds of things that could happen from a narrative perspective. So the idea that someone could invade you, or the idea of where you stand in terms of status, all of these things are kind of processed in a narrative form and they have a start, middle and end. So if your goal is to remember anything specific, and it's not always possible, but when it is, it's usually a good idea, and that is to tie it back to some kind of story. So the last thing that I want to mention is the idea of specific material, and that is the kinds of things that you should focus and direct your attention and learning towards. For me personally, my goal has been and still is to build up these reference points for certain topics such as psychology, health, relationships and fulfillment. Obviously these are all large topics and they can be broken down into further subtopics such as career, dating, diet and so on. It's not to say that everyone should focus on these concepts to the same extent that I am, or that they will apply to everyone to the same extent, but my future videos will be largely delving into these topics, so if you're interested, feel free to subscribe or even like this video. But for now, thanks for watching. I'm going to end this video here, and I will see you in the next one.